136 Americans die every day due to opioids, more than breast cancer, car accidents, and gun violence. Efforts by physicians to prescribe less opioids have shown only a small decrease in drug overdose mortality rates. However, illicit opioids such as heroin and fentanyl deaths are rapidly increasing. And there is no question action must be taken before countless more lives are destroyed from overuse and addiction. Join us as we search for answers. Does medicinal cannabis have the potential to diminish the burden of opioids for patients with chronic pain? Let's go behind the mystery. According to a recent report from the CDC, 20% of American adults, over 50 million people, are living with chronic pain.
25 years ago, I started having pain in my lower back and my knees. I saw a few rheumatologists, and one was finally able to narrow it down to being ankylosing spondylitis, which is an autoimmune inflammatory disease, very similar to an arthritis. At first, the pain was bearable, but then it became consuming. It was all day, every day, through the night. I started using a cane. At one point, I was using a wheelchair for any kind of distance or any kind of an activity. And the disease itself led me to take pain medication and then disease-modifying medications, which unfortunately a lot of those drugs caused other issues, which I needed to take a new medication to combat some of those side effects. My medical situation became all-consuming, whether it was the pain that I was in, the medication, the treatments. I saw chiropractors, I saw massage therapists, I tried acupuncture, I tried everything. I was a young mom with two young children, and my days consisted of medications, doctor's appointments, and tests. I felt that I wasn't able to be the mom that I had envisioned myself being. I was able to go and watch my children do their activities, but I wasn't able to participate in a way that I had wanted to. I felt very sidelined in my own life with my children, with my friends, with my family, and I felt that I was watching my life. I wasn't participating in it.
Dr. Blake Pearson has spent his career as a practicing family physician. He is passionate about developing research in the field of medicinal cannabis and has treated thousands of patients with chronic pain using cannabinoid-based medicine.
Chronic pain is typically described as pain symptoms that have lasted for 3 to 6 months and generally include some diagnoses like fibromyalgia, degenerative disc disease, pain from osteo or rheumatoid arthritis, and neuropathic pain. Patients with chronic pain can also experience episodes of acute pain, which we call acute on chronic pain. And what this means is that they generally have a moderate level of pain throughout the day. However, sometimes they can experience episodes of intense or acute pain. This often requires breakthrough pain medication. Most patients will be on a chronic level of a medication to manage their pain, and if they overdo it, weather changes, some of these things can cause acute pain, and they may need another medication to take as needed or on demand. Over the years, I've managed thousands of patients with a number of chronic pain diagnoses. Certainly, a lot of them have reasonable goals, things like playing with the grandchildren again, or having a meal with friends without having to leave because of pain. So it's simple quality of life markers that we're generally after in managing these patients, or what seems simple to people without chronic pain. And there's no doubt life can be quite difficult for these patients.
It's estimated 3 million people in the United States are suffering from substance use disorders related to prescription opioid pain relievers. Recent data published by the NIH indicates that 75% of people who abuse opioids reported that their first opioid was a prescription drug. And chronic pain is the common denominator. So finding alternative treatments to opioids is a matter of urgency.
A typical patient with chronic pain will likely start with conservative measures to manage their pain. Things like physiotherapy, massage, chiropractic care would be good examples of that. Next, if pain fails to improve after conservative measures, then patients would move to pharmacologic therapy. Typically, that would start with over-the-counter medications and then progress to prescription medications to manage their pain. That included using opiates. With opiates, they were never meant to be used for chronic pain settings. In fact, there's no evidence to suggest there's efficacy after 6 months in that patient population. The longer you're on opiates, you run the risk of actually worsening your pain, what we call opiate hyperalgesia. Ultimately, you get into a cycle of unmanaged pain, which results in dose escalation, which results in unwanted side effects, changes to the brain, possibly resulting in addiction, dependence, and overdose. We know that 75 to 80% of people who abuse opiates ultimately get their first prescription from a physician. So if you can avoid that first prescription, you can avoid the harms of opiates. We need to find alternatives, and oftentimes you can avoid an opiate prescription by using a cannabinoid-based medicine.
At one point, I was taking 17 pills. Some of them were for pain, some of them were for the disease, but then others were to combat side effects of the other pills that I was taking. I felt like I was in a tornado spinning around and around, and nothing was getting better. The pain was getting worse. I was getting more side effects. My mobility was decreasing, and I needed to be myself again. I have had the same family doctor since I was 4 years old, and so he had followed me along on this journey and of course had referred me to specialists and whatnot. And during one visit with him, I broke down and said, I need something different, something has to change. I can't live like this anymore. He had suggested me seeing Dr. Pearson and the possibility of medicinal cannabis. And at first I put on the brakes because in my mind I had a stereotypical view of what that was, and I was thinking, you know, I'm the mother of 2 children. I do not want to be smoking anything and smelling that way, and in my mind it wasn't what a good mom did. But after that visit, I went home and I sat and I thought about what a good mom is, and a good mom is someone who's there for their children. A good mom is someone who is able to participate in their lives. And I wasn't doing that, so I called him back and I said, I do want to see Dr. Pearson, and I was ready to look into it and hear what he had to say.
Medical cannabis is physician-recommended use of specific cannabinoids to manage specific conditions. Oftentimes we're using milligrams of CBD and THC in oils or capsules to treat conditions like chronic pain, insomnia, and epilepsy. My community was particularly hard hit by the opiate crisis, which led me to want to look for alternatives, and that's what sparked my interest in cannabinoid-based medicines. I began to treat some of my patients using cannabinoid-based medicines. Started out managing chronic pain in only a handful of patients, but once I saw the potential to manage pain in these patients, reduce opiates in some of these patients, also reduce other medications, I started to exclusively practice cannabinoid-based medicines, and after working with thousands of patients over the years, it's become clear that it is an alternative to opiates and a safe alternative at that.
It's ironic that more and more studies are showing the efficacy and safety of cannabis with respect to chronic pain. However, physicians continue to be more likely to prescribe opioids more frequently than cannabinoid-based medicines. Yet prescription opioids are legal, and cannabis is not. But that wasn't always the case. There are records of medicinal use in China dating back to 3000 BC. In the late 19th century, cannabis became a popular ingredient in many medicinal products and was sold openly in public pharmacies, touting benefits including pain relief, digestive issues, and psychological disorders. Cannabinoid-based medicine is still in its early stages. Medical practitioners and patients are hesitant to partake, in part because of the stigma associated with marijuana and the normalization of opioid treatment. Dr. Pearson is working to change that perception through research and education.
A common misconception of medical cannabis is that patients are smoking joints, and that is certainly not the case. We're using targeted doses to treat specific conditions. The other important thing to note is we're using regulated, tested products, just like any other medication. In comparison to other analgesic classes, specifically opiates, medical cannabis is certainly a safer option. There is no lethal dose and no risk of cardiorespiratory depression, which right there stands out greatly compared to opiates. We often see patients' morphine equivalents come down in our observational studies. We often see patients coming off a number of medications in our studies. And I think that's really the important point, is it's an emerging class of medication. There is evidence, especially for chronic pain, and there is the ability to reduce polypharmacy, reduce opiates, and save lives.
Medicinal cannabis has been reported to have potential efficacy in reducing pain, muscle spasms, chemotherapy-induced nausea, vomiting, and intractable childhood epilepsy. In fact, the FDA has approved a handful of cannabinoid-based medicines and deemed them safe and effective. So, how does cannabis interact with our body? Dr. Pearson explains.
We all have an endocannabinoid system, and I think that is the most important thing to note. You hear about cannabis, cannabinoids, because of plants. You might be familiar with THC, CBD. Those are cannabinoids from plants, what we call phytocannabinoids. There are synthetic cannabinoids, which you produce in a lab. There's medications that are synthetic THC. But we have our own endocannabinoid system. We make cannabinoids, which are molecules that bind to receptors in our body. And these receptors, this whole enzyme system, works to maintain homeostasis. What does that mean? It's involved in sleep, it's involved in rest, it's involved in digestion, it's in our skin cells. Because the endocannabinoid system is so wide-ranging, with CB1 receptors primarily located in the central nervous system, the CB2 receptors are primarily located in the immune system. There are some wide-ranging effects when used medically.
Before I made the choice to try medicinal cannabis, I met with Dr. Pearson 3 times. I wanted to understand everything about the medication. I wanted to understand possible side effects, and I had to wrap my own head around the idea of being on medicinal cannabis because there is such a stereotype. I assumed I was going to have to smoke it, which was not something that I was interested in at all. I was afraid of going back in pain level. I was afraid of having withdrawals because I had been on that medication for so long. Dr. Pearson worked with my family doctor, and my family doctor took control of their narcotics, weaning me off of those, while Dr. Pearson introduce the medicinal cannabis. So luckily I had no withdrawal symptoms. I did not suffer physically from that at all. I could feel that there was a difference, so it got me excited to continue on with it.
When working with Kelly, medical cannabis was a reasonable option because she had unmanaged pain for many years. She had been on a number of different medications that had failed and was having some side effects due to those medications. So when we assessed her profile and we had our visit, it was clear that this was a reasonable option. We worked together to formulate a plan that of course involved reducing her pain, but another one of the goals was reducing the current medication she was on, including her opiates and her sleep medication at night. Medical cannabis offers a chance to personalize the approach to medicine, and that is where medicine is moving.
Coming up, the efforts to move medicinal cannabis into the front lines through the development of novel medications. The need has never been greater to look into the possibility that legal cannabis could replace opioids in many circumstances, saving hundreds of thousands of lives over the course of the next decade. According to a 2016 survey in the Journal of the American Pain Society, medical cannabis use was associated with a 64% decrease in opioid use. Determined to move the needle closer to solving the opioid crisis, Tetra Biopharma is a global leader in cannabinoid-derived drug discovery and development. CEO Dr. Guy Chamberlain has specific expertise in the development of drug-device combination products, biologics, and botanical medicines.
One thing that's important with the development of any drug is ensuring that we have the patient in mind. Tetra Biopharma back in 2016 decided to study inhaled cannabis, smoked cannabis, basically to understand why it worked. It was very important for us to comprehend why patients were reporting in various surveys that smoked cannabis was superior to fentanyl and morphine. Our goal was really as a company to develop special medications that would really help patients with their suffering. We ran a very exhaustive study on the safety, the pharmacokinetics, and the pharmacodynamics of inhaled cannabis in patients. We began doing it with smoked cannabis, and as a company we evolved developing it into vaporized cannabis because we were able to show that it was going to be safer, say from a quality point of view. It would also destroy all of the mycotoxins if there were any. But more importantly, we were able to maintain the exact same quantity of medicinal ingredients that would enter the patient's body as there was from the smoked cannabis. Again, that for us was key to ensure that the traditional way cannabis has been used was respected. Our goal was really to develop new drugs that would be available to patients through their physicians and be backed by the same evidence that every other prescription drug was developed with.
Tetra Biopharma uses scientific validation and safety data that meet the requirements of the pharmaceutical industry. Dr. Aurelia DePaul runs the clinical operations.
My role at Tetra Bio is to maintain an oversight on every activities that are conducted in the clinical department, meaning that I contribute to the strategy of the clinical research. I ensure that we maintain compliance with the FDA requirements, the good clinical practices as well, and our own internal procedure. So what we hope with our product is that we will be able to beat opioids in terms of fast onset of pain relief. And the reason of this hypothesis is because it's an inhaled product. So the maximum product in the blood is reached within 5 minutes compared to 45 minutes, 1 hour for short-acting opioids. So opioids are very strong to alleviate pain, but they are pure analgesic. In terms of cannabinoid-derived medicine, the cannabis THC product, act differently. So they are partially analgesic, but they're also acting through a different mechanisms in the brain, what we call a dissociative effect. So in other words, the patient, when he's taking a THC-based product, he knows that the pain is still there, but the pain doesn't bother him anymore. And that's what the patients are telling you. Cannabinoids represent a very great alternative, and we have shown that in our trials. These represent another class of painkillers that should be part of the pharmacopoeia for the patients.
I've now been on medicinal cannabis for 5 years, and it has changed my life drastically. My pain level has decreased. I am no longer on any narcotics at all. I am able to be present in my daughter's lives. I think it's a game changer, and I think if it would have been an option way back when, my story would have been different.
Over the years, I've seen so many patients benefit from medical cannabis, and I believe this is one of the biggest advancements in medicine of our time. We owe it to our patients.
If you would like more information on the subject discussed today, visit tetrabiopharma.com, and you can also visit our website, thebalancingact.com. See you next time.